Now a waiata, a song. Bronwyn, you going to join me? E hara I te mea, no naene te aroha, no nā tūpuna, tuku iho, tuku iho. Rough translation, throw your cell phones, KPIs, and annual plans in the bin. What matters is the love passed down from the ancestors.
We meet today on country of which the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation have been custodians for generations, on which the members of this nation performed age-old ceremonies of celebration, initiation, and renewal. I again acknowledge the elders past and present and emerging leaders in their community. I acknowledge the ongoing struggle of First Peoples for justice, for voice, for treaty, and for truth. Thank you, Glyn, for your mihi, and Glyn and Bronwyn for the waiata. It made me cry. Thank you for sharing the spiritual blessings that Māori have gifted to the second peoples of many cultures with whom they share Aotearoa New Zealand. I want to acknowledge the other New Zealanders, the Kiwis, who are here today too, those who have travelled across the Tasman to be at Common Dreams, and those like Claire and me who are sojourning here. As I have observed the participation of New Zealanders at Common Dreams, I have been reminded again in a small way of the tendency that dominant cultures have to assume that their issues are universal. If there's another Common Dreams conference, I hope we do better at avoiding the pattern of speaking of Australian issues and our experiences, and I put myself in this, in ways that obscure the particular contributions and concerns of Aotearoa. After all, Common Dreams names itself as an alliance of Australian and New Zealand kindred organisations. I feel that I have probably failed personally in this by neglecting to include in this talk a joke about the sporting superiority of Kiwis. But I have to say that Israel Folau's unfortunate venture into public theology has made talk of rugby a little complex at this time. So I also want to say thank you to my colleagues and collaborators who have presented your thoughts, your art, your music over the weekend. And thanks to all of you for being a community of engagement as we seek to respond to the insights of creation spirituality, respect and love for the sacred earth, the gift of original blessing, and our common home. I'm sorry that Professor Elaine Wainwright, who was to have given a talk at this point in the program, was not able to be with us because of ill health. There have been several points during the week when I've been really sorry about that as I've been trying to finish the speech and do the things that needed to be done. But I do hold Elaine in my heart. Elaine is a Roman Catholic feminist New Testament scholar, and she had chosen as her topic for today reading our sacred story from within our common home. And no doubt she would have drawn on the inspiring and meticulous scholarship of her 2016 book, Habitat, Human and Holy, an echo-rhetorical reading of the Gospel of Matthew. So I want to honour Elaine's work and hope for her a speedy return to good health. Before I explore further the themes of hope and acting out in ethics in more depth, I want to say a word about religion in public places. Public theology is concerned with how Christian faith intersects with society and with the challenges that are facing human societies, planetary society. When we examine and critique existing social practices and cultural understandings in the light of our deepest religious insights into justice and what the good society should look like, we are doing public theology. Much of contemporary Christianity, however, emphasises a privatised, personalised relationship with Jesus and a concern with what happens when we die. On the other hand, many progressive Christian theologians have turned our attention to the concern of Jesus and to his community of friends, because he wasn't a lone ranger. He was a connected person, part of a movement. We've turned our attention to those people, to that movement, for the social, spiritual, political, and economic well-being of this world. There are, however, significant challenges around the engagement of people of faith in public life. We face a major communication problem. What we believe is often lost in translation. We progressives lack the ability to go into the public space and say something as clear as homosexuals are going to hell, for example. We want to explain about how we understand the Bible. We want to explain the context of Leviticus and 1 Corinthians, and we can't do that in a soundbite or a meme. And so we get lost in translation. We want to collaborate in pursuit of the common good, but for our secular fellow travellers, religious framing of social and ecological concerns in the language of faith just doesn't make sense. At best, it is regarded as unnecessary. You've probably all heard that you don't need to go to church or synagogue or temple or the mosque or whatever in order to be a good person. At worst, we are considered gullible and stupid. It doesn't take long for any discussion about religion on Twitter before a secular person reduces interest in the sacred to belief in the sky fairy. So I just wanted to share a little bit of social media insight into the issues of getting lost in translation. Yeah, so that's us, trying to make ourselves understood in another language, beating our heads against the wall. But thanks to the Australian Christian lobby in Australia and Family First in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the secular public sure knows what conservative Christians believe, and they know the actions that follow from their beliefs, the actions of exclusion, hate speech, campaigns to undermine the human rights of other people, campaigns that would limit women's access to reproductive health, campaigns that endorse and promote patriarchy without questioning the ways that that can lead to domestic violence and abuse. We know that progressive Christians who do not take the Bible literally are regarded by conservative Christians as not being real Christians. That I understand. What I find more frustrating is that many secular people seem to think we are not real Christians either, and I've often had it suggested to me that I should just, move on from being a person of faith, especially by people in the LGBTIQ community, and I understand where they're coming from. Often it seems that we are as effective as Scotsmen battling voice recognition technology in getting our message out and understood in the public sphere. And while the Scots should not have to change their accents in order to get to the 11th floor, we do have to find ways of being Christian in public that can be understood. And I think that that's where ethics comes in. Almost no one who is not a progressive Christian will be interested in what we believe. It's only what we do that will get public attention. And we do have the opportunity to do something very different in public to the Christians whose visibility is currently high because they are presenting themselves as victims of religious persecution, when in fact they are seeking rights to discriminate in the provision of services and employment. We have the opportunity to hold out hope and to act up for justice. What we say in public must match what we do. Our solidarity with the ones that Jesus called the least of these, the ones that Rachel Collis sang about in the opening concert when we met on Thursday night. Our theology, even our ethical reflection, as fond as I am of that, none of this matters to the least of these unless we are going to act up and act out what we believe. So my discipline academically is Christian social ethics, grounded in feminist liberation theology and more recently shaped by queer and post-colonial theology. I'm passionate about the discipline of ethics because it takes the splendid biblical work done by people like Elaine Wainwright and the theological work done by the scholars of the Jesus Seminar and others, and it asks the question, how then shall we live? If this is what we believe, what will we value? What choices will we make? What will we do? The tradition of creation spirituality, the field of work that Matthew Fox has developed and taught, shares an affinity with liberation ethics in the clear conviction that what we believe, how we understand ourselves and our relationships to other humans, other creatures, and to the planet, and to the sacred energy in which all is held, these relationships shape who we are and how we live. Creation spirituality is clear about the lived world implications of particular constructs of faith. And as creation spirituality is about tasting the sacred, liberation ethics is also about moving out of our heads, connecting our hearts and our hands, our body selves, to the work of theological and biblical reflection. The people who shaped the program for this conference were determined that it would not just be intellectual entertainment that would allow us to feel a bit superior to conservative evangelicals, though that is occasionally okay. That's not what we're here for. We were hoping that the presenters would challenge us and nourish us, and they certainly have. Matthew Fox and Anne Patel-Gray and other thinkers, activists, artists, poets, and musicians have enabled us to move closer to the world of our common dreams this weekend. For me, this conference has not just been a place where my already established beliefs have been comfortably validated. What I have heard and seen has renewed my hope, and I am confident that it will empower my acting. As an ethicist, I pay attention to the impact of theological reflection and spiritual practice on our acting up and our acting out. I reference acting up in the sense of the description that we give to children who are behaving in ways that are disruptive to our plans and our expectations. Claire and I have friends who have a 2-year-old son who is currently a practitioner of what could be called peak tantrum. He wails, he lies down, he gets in the way, his outrage is uncontained. It's not pretty. The nasal fluids flow. It's totally exhausting for his mothers, and I would not want to be living through it. But children's tantrums can remind us of how accustomed we have become to that which once would have outraged us, which should still outrage us. The prophetic task involves disrupting the powers, acting up so that systems of oppression do not remain unexamined and unjust practices, the business as usual, do not continue uninterrupted. In the 1980s, when HIV and AIDS was devastating communities of gay men in the US, when political leaders such as Ronald Reagan refused even to speak of AIDS, a group called ACT UP disrupted the life-threatening inertia of the political and medical establishments, often by engaging in civil disobedience and non-violent direct action. As a progressive Christian feminist liberation ethicist, I also mean acting out in the sense of leaning into, touching, exploring, tasting the reign of God. Acting it out in order that glimpses of God's dream for the world may be seen and known here and now. Acting out in faith communities and spiritual communities is expressed in the practices of equality, hospitality, and healing. At their best, they remind us who we are, to whom we belong, so that we may resist all that is of empire, all that denies life. In the midst of conflict and at times of despair about the state of politics and the state of the planet, holding to hope that our lives and our world can be different, and acting out love and acting out justice are crucial tasks. So too is the experience of creating and sharing joy. One of the things that I think that we really need to be able to communicate to ourselves and to the world around us is that as people of faith, we are not biblicists. We are not calling on the rules that we will find in our sacred texts. We are listening to the stories of the people of God who have been searching for meaning, searching for what it is to be human, to be a creature of the planet, to be in relation with God. And so we need to name clearly to ourselves and to those around us that we draw not just on Scripture, but on tradition about the way that the Scriptures have been read, on reason, on the power that we have been given to think things through, on all that we have learned from science and social science, and on experience. This is one of my great frustrations, even within the more progressive parts of the church, is to not allow the stories of those who are affected deeply by the theological frameworks and agendas that we promulgate, to not allow their voices to be heard. And I think that Anne's speaking to us last night and at other points in the conference have been a remarkable example of how powerful and significant that is. It disturbs us, it shakes the axis of our foundations, and it enables us to do good ethical work. It enables us to find ways to take action together. The challenges faced by our society are manifold and complex. What we have previously named as the ecological challenge created by human misuse of the resources of the environment is no longer merely a challenge, but a crisis, manifest most particularly in the crisis of climate. The earth has been injured. The earth cries out. The violence and injustice done to Indigenous people in this context is amplified and intensified as the land, the sacred land, is exploited for profit. And across the globe, millions of people are displaced, causing human suffering and crises of migration and refugees. And the profit makers of militarism contribute their millions to the politics that protect their power and their wealth. Fascism in Trump's America and Dutton's Australia becomes acceptable as numbed human communities fail to notice that the unthinkable is becoming a reality. As clear as I am about the way that we need to find other ways of being Christian in public, by the practices of simple kindness and more complex justice seeking, I am also certain that within our faith communities we have to engage in theological reframing, even if these do need to be our internal conversation. This time in our planetary life involves some difficult travel, traversing the challenging places in our understandings of the sacred and the self, facing the questions that we would rather not address. But we and our people have been doing this for generation after generation, for thousands of years. We seek a blessing now, such as Abraham surely sought after following the call of God to leave behind his kin and his land, to go with Sarai to a place where God did not reside. In ancient religion, before the era of the early Israelites, gods were linked to a particular place, to the people of that place. The God of Abraham and Sarah was leading them to an unknown place. And so that story expresses a new movement in human theology, a dawning understanding that the sacred will not be limited by geography, though understood in particular ways because of geography. It was to be more than a millennium later before a descendant of Sarai and Abram from that nowhere town of Nazareth would also claim that neither was God linked to a particular race or nation. We have always been evolving our understanding of the sacred. In 2016, near the end of his life, Leonard Cohen released the song, "You Want It Darker." In the song, he wrestles with God, just as his Jewish forebears did before him, just as we must do now. He wrestles with an idea of God. In the face of human violence and suffering, he questions the nature of God, good, powerful God, God the absent and indifferent, God the callous and cruel. And the nature of the holy haunts his final reflection. If God is good and powerful, why do some people suffer? Cohen does not question God's power, but he rages against God's unwillingness to address suffering, and he rails against a theology of divine love. Like the psalmist, he challenges God to be God. It's Sunday morning, so we need a hymn, so Leonard Cohen is going to provide it. So it's not hallelujah. Cohen did not go gently into that good night. There was no making peace with God here. He is proclaiming a mighty grudge, but he's struggling to understand the sacred. And in our faith communities and different traditions, we engage in that same struggle. For Christians, right from the time of Jesus' community of friends, we see that struggle. Maybe he began to feel that it was all going to go to custard, that his life would end because of the path that he had taken. And so we have words such as are recorded in Mark 8, though probably not recorded because I'm not sure what colour the Jesus seminar would give them, but where he says, "The chosen one must undergo great suffering and be killed, and after 3 days rise again." Be killed and yet endure beyond death. The juxtaposition of Jesus' ministry of healing and teaching with the prediction of suffering was too much for his friend Peter, who rebuked Jesus, and Jesus rebuked him. Peter's difficulty was not unlike our own or that of Leonard Cohen. How do we understand? 1,000,000 candles burning for the help that never came. 1,000,000 candles burning for the love that never came. Are the candles the souls of children who died in the Shoah? Cohen fumes that millions are asking, praying for help, but God neither hears nor answers. God is supposed to guide, help, and love humans, but aid and love are not here. Yet worse than that, Cohen imputes ill will to God. He ponders if it might be God's will that humans hurt and harm, that the evil acts of humanity are in fact humans doing God's will. You want it darker? We kill the flame, the antithesis of a merciful and loving God. In this bold and appalling statement, I think Cohen is rejecting theologies that attribute the state of the world to God, and that's one of the most important things that we can say into the public space. Because if God is in control, as many conservative people in many faiths believe, then God is a bastard, and Cohen has had enough of that God. If you are the dealer, I'm out of the game. If you are the healer, it means I'm broken and lame. If thine is the glory, then mine must be the shame. I've had enough of an image of God that makes me peon in a horrifying game. I've had enough of being a toy for God who lets people suffer while rabbis and priests still sing glory to God and assign shame to suffering people. There's a lover in the story, but the story is still the same. There's a lullaby for suffering and a paradox to blame, but it's written in the scriptures and it's not some idle claim. You want it darker. Cohen is right. Religion has been used as a lullaby for suffering, an opiate for the people. In the Christian context, the reference to human sinfulness and original sin, for which God requires payment, has been used to disempower and keep the poor submissive to priestly and political power. Cohen names the political abuses and military collusion. They're lining up the prisoners and the guards are taking aim. I struggled with some demons, they were middle class and tame. I didn't know I had permission to murder and to maim. You want it darker. Killing by the powerful is every day given theological justification. But Cohen will not be subservient. He is prepared to stand before this God. Hineni, Hineni, I'm ready, my Lord. Hineni is used many times in the Hebrew Bible. Literally it means behold, but it is understood to mean here I am, as in the Here I Am, Lord song. But this is not the compliant Here I Am, Lord of that familiar hymn. This is not Cohen on his knees, seeking mercy or direction. Cohen is defiant. Behold, here I stand. I'm ready to go, but not because I'm trusting in your will, God. I'm ready to go because I will not comply with the ordering of suffering and violence that seems to be your will. I want out of the game. It's not my game. Cohen's struggle, our struggle, Peter and his friends, Jesus' disciples, it's our struggle. It's hard to reconcile suffering with power given by God. We want God to end human suffering. Yet Jesus knew that if his ministry was to continue in accordance with God's will, it would unavoidably bring him into deadly conflict with power. He saw the inevitability of it. The activist Jesuit priest Daniel Berrigan once said that if you want to follow Jesus, you better look good on wood. There's a cost. Human life constantly raises questions about the necessity of suffering, injustice, and death. These are our hard questions for God. So we need to say something about God. God, for me, is not a person-like being who is in control of every tiny event in the universe, who can be placated by our prayers and petitions or influenced by our behaviour. God consciousness is instead opening and seeking and experiencing the holy, the divine power that is at the centre of the universe. God flows through all that is present in all that is life-giving. Everything we say about God is metaphor. We cannot pin it down. And yet the spiritual life enables us to experience God, to know very profoundly the truth that is love and goodness and beauty, to sense that there is a path that we can choose that enhances life, and another one which annihilates life. And so many of us seek to order our lives around, for Christians, around Jesus of Nazareth, the one who for us most profoundly showed us what God is like and what it is like to live in harmony with the divine. Not a God who looked down and saw a wicked world that must be punished for its sins, and so sent his son Jesus to earth to pay the price of the sinfulness of the world. Not a God who desires violence. Jesus was pointing us to a God who relates to us in two primary ways. First, the divine power is love, and when we open ourselves to this power, we know that we too are loved and accepted, so love. And secondly, this God power allows us freedom. Freedom. God does not intervene in every detail of our lives because God knows that the creation needs freedom. It is as if God, who desires to be in relation with creation, knows that relationship, in order to be true relationship, must be grounded in freedom. Jesus the Christ is the incarnation of love and freedom. Known now in many ways and many traditions, in the cosmic Christ, in God made known in the sacred universe, expressed amongst feminist Christians as God made known in Christa community, the experience of the presence of God no longer limited by the maleness of the historical Jesus. Love and freedom are the core of human life. When I address God in prayer and song, I am not speaking to God as a sort of super person, but I am opening myself to the God within me, among us and beyond us, to creation of which we are a part, infused by this God power. I cannot prove this. I can only believe it and try to live as if I believe it. And I know that I cannot do that alone, and for for me, that is why I have to be part of a community of faith. Because we have options for the ways that we look at the world. We can decide that at the centre of everything there is evil, and few of us can live with that option because it carries so little hope, and somehow it violates our view of ourselves and those we know. Or we can decide that there is nothing or chaos at the centre of everything. Or if there is or ever was somebody or something, it's gone now. Many people choose this version. They live their lives trying to find meaning and pattern in it, other than what they can see in front of them. And these people often have a very high sense of responsibility to live justly and creatively. They live to please no God, but to live with integrity. And all of this I deeply respect. There are others who live only for themselves because they see no larger picture and no purpose in doing anything else. We can decide to believe that in spite of the random justice and injustice of life, at the centre of everything lies love and good. We may call this sacred energy, being, many different names. Those who choose this option then face life deciding how to connect with and interpret the activity of this power whom some call God. And there are, of course, many different paths, many different namings of the sacred, but all great religions have some sort of good and loving centre to the universe, just different ways of working with that. For those of us who are followers of the way, we might end up in a different... I think we can be with Cohen in the moment of rage and lament, and we can be with Cohen in the unpacking of theology that serves violence and abuse of power. We can affirm what we see in Jesus as God's beloved child. But unlike Peter, at least at one point, we are going to live with the freedom that is also part of the essence of life. So in conclusion, I don't think that illness, death, suffering, and injustice are sent by God. I don't think that there is a God who selects people to test with injustices to see how strong they are. I don't think that God gives some parents a child with severe disability because they are, in God's opinion, able to handle that. That's something that's been said to me as a parent of an autistic child. That God is less loving than most of us are. That God is playing with people's lives. Suffering is part of the nature of the world. It just is. If all our suffering is connected with some hidden plan of God, then life is perilous, since that plan is never clear. The tricky God who only pretends to offer us freedom and dignity. I believe that this is a tricky God who would do such a thing. I believe that genuinely innocent suffering, which is different from suffering caused by oppression, is totally random. It is not linked to punishment or plan, but is rather a consequence of being part of an unfinished and very free creation. The rain does fall on the just and unjust alike, and so does trouble and sorrow. What is different from this view and the view of the universe that sees nothing or chaos at the heart of the universe is that along with suffering, there is also a God, a power, love, who cares with us, about us, and whom we can trust. We know that we experience a sense of that caring, a connection with us in our grieving, our weakness, our fear, and our pain, that we are not alone. I cannot prove the existence of this God. It is an act of faith to believe it, and for us to live as if we believe in it. This was true for Jesus in his promise to live faithfully to those like Abram and Sarah who trusted God on their venture. While there is suffering, there is also hope. There is also God's dream, and that is at the centre of our hope. Believing God's promise means acting with courage, with hope, Sometimes we can do that in full confidence, sometimes in laughing wonder, sometimes with fear and trepidation. Believing God's promise is not about those list of things that you have to believe to get into heaven. Believing God's promise involves giving one's heart to that belief and holding it actively with love. Believing means having enough confidence in its reality to act on it, incredible though that may seem. Thank you.
Te whakapono, e te Ave Maria, kato tato e aroha, te whakapono, e te Ave Maria, tato tato My watch says we've got about 2 minutes. Anyone got a question, one that can be answered in less than 2 minutes? Go for it.
Hello, my name's Helen. No doubt you answered this, but I haven't quite got it yet. You talked about not believing in an interventionist Lord, but in the end you said believing in God's promise. Yeah. What is God's promise?
It's a very good question. Yeah, so I believe that it is, for me, it is known in Jesus, and in a world where there is equality and justice and kindness, where we love. So I think that's laid out for us in our faith and in other faith traditions as well as a vision. So I've named it as God's promise, but not that God is going to make it happen, but that we are going to pray it with our feet and with our hearts and our hands to make it happen, yeah, and to be part of it. And we might only see a glimpse of it. And that's one of the things that's really important for me as a person of faith, is that there are so many things that we hope for that we don't see happening, and we continue to see injustice. I think of the people on Manus Island, the men on Manus Island, that ever since I've been in Australia, I've been thinking, well, this must get sorted, this must change, and it can't get any worse, and it does, time and time and time again, get worse. And yet, I have to live in a hope that there is a promise of something more, that those of us who are working on this issue, who care about it, care about those men, that we will keep telling their stories and live. We will bear witness to a hope that it can be different. And I think that's part of what we can do in public, is to bear witness to the hope for a reality where people are treated with kindness, where there is justice, where what has been done, what has been wrong, can be put right, not by a glib apology, but by restitution and by transformation of our structures.
I want to honour the program organisers and bring the session to a close. And on our behalf of the whole conference, Margaret, thank you. Thank you very much.